Thank you. Good morning and welcome everyone to our panel on engaging with aesthetic forms. My name is Jenny Marlene Fischer and I'm co-convening this panel together with Bernardo Machado, who is joining us from Brazil, and it's, I guess, 4 a.m. in the morning. So thank you very much for waking up so early. I'm based at the University of Constance, and Bernardo is based at the Campina University, is this right, in Sao Paulo in Brazil. And we don't want to occupy too much time in the beginning, but we just wanted to say a few words about the idea behind this panel. Yeah, don't be sad. Actually, it's interesting because our research interests of Bernardo and myself are quite diverse, quite different, but we realized, I guess, half a year ago or something, that the concepts that we use and also the interests that we have are aligning quite well. And just quickly, because Bernardo is obviously talking about his work later on, he's among other things working on transnational creator practices between Brazil and the US. And I'm looking into aesthetic activism in South Africa as a traveling film. So quite diverse fields, but what we share in common and what this panel is actually also based on is the question on how aesthetic forms carry a certain kind of cargo, be it ideological, be it political, affective, whatever, that is influencing more than just the context of the art form itself. So we are asking about the transformational, political, affective potential of art forms that go, that shape more than this certain context. And also what happens when forms travel transnationally, so also in different social and spatial contexts, surroundings, how forms change and how they change the surroundings actually. So we are very much looking forward to the session today, and just for you to know how we structured it, we were thinking to have shorter inputs from our panelists. So we actually had the challenge, and we know that it is a challenge to just talk 12 minutes. Now we had a slight change in the program, so it's okay if you talk for 15 minutes. But we are planning to have the first session just listening to the papers, and the second session getting more interactive with the audience and really having time to exchange ideas with everyone, both here in the room and in our virtual room. And so this is basically the idea. So I would like the audience to please keep your questions, comments, and thoughts for the second part of this session. And we will also have a comment in the second session from a discussant from Maxime Paulo, who is probably joining us in, I don't know, maybe later, maybe tomorrow. And he will give a comment, so you are also invited to come to the second session tomorrow afternoon. And for now, I've been talking a lot, so I would say we start. And I'm happy to introduce our first speaker, Nada Al-Hudaid, who is a research fellow at the University of London. She's a social and visual anthropologist who specializes on religious Islamic art. So her research interests are visual anthropology, religion and art, and more recently, because of autobiographical reasons, childcare across cultures. So Nada, the floor is yours. I just open your presentation here. I have to share the screen. Okay, can you in the online audience see this now? Okay, thank you.
Should come here. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. I prepared for this quite a while ago, not very me, because I'm always a last minute person. So I hope I'm going to retain as much information as I can. So let's see. So I work with religious art, Shia religious art in Kuwait. And I just put some information there for people who might not know where Kuwait is. It's a small country within the Arab Gulf countries, and not a very, so it's almost 4 million people, out of which a fraction of the population are Kuwaitis, and between like in general, Shia are believed to be 40%, and some say less. Regardless of what it is, it's a significant percentage which affects somehow the activities they do, because they have quite a significant power in terms of either money or economic power or religious power. And that's what I mean by that is that the way they produce specific kind of religious productions affect the region, and now, of course, internationally as well. So I find Kuwait quite an interesting place to study. So I looked at two kinds of art. As you can see on your left, it's statues, and on the right are paintings. I'm going to focus mainly on statues, I think, in this one. Exactly. I'm going to focus on statues, which is quite an uncommon kind of religious art within Islam. And many people, I don't know how much you know of that, but you know, the kind of general understanding is that Islam does not favor depictions, human or animal depictions. So in this case, we have not just depictions, as you see here, but also we've got statues. And it's quite common, and it's not kind of forbidden art. So the kind of work I do is not something that stays in museums. They don't have museums. They have, it's kind of something similar to what you said, but it's very temporary kind of exhibitions where they produce particular kind of art for religious practices. And then once that period or month or week is gone, the art is removed. So the place I worked with is kind of like this. It's on a private house. They have space, they make space for women for free to come and learn how to paint for free from other women who are Shia as well. And in this case, we can see a group of women learning how to draw, I think, with the charcoal art. This is some of the work that was going before Muharram. So it is one of the very important months for Shia when they commemorate the death of Imam Hussein, who's the grandson of Prophet Muhammad. So it's quite a significant month. And I hope you don't mind the noise here, because he is really not happy being restricted. The art that they produce, so this is a room that they call Husseiniya. Husseiniya is a place where they practice their religious activities, such as attending sermons, praying. So it's a very religious space. So they hire for making art. So during, let's say, the commemoration of one of the birth of the Imams, they will set up this exhibition, they will come attend sermons, and then they will look at the painting, and this is kind of now seen as a regular, normal activity to be part of their commemorations, which is quite interesting because it's happening a lot as well now in the West as well, in different cities. So it's quite transnational as well, and they exchange paintings between each other and ideas, and sometimes if they can't send the painting, they send a PDF of it, and printing happens in another country, especially in that region where, like Iran, Iraq, Syria, Bahrain, those kind of regions, countries. The one we see here is a birth event. So it's the 12th Imam who's believed to come, Imam Mahdi. And as you can see here on the floor, this is a regular traditional thing that's been practiced for many years. It's like putting food displayed in a very beautiful way. But the new thing, the new addition is these paintings that you see. So people will come, still listen to sermons, get this food, drink, eat whatever is there, and then along the way they will have a look at these paintings. I find them very beautiful. So I'm talking about dreams for this one, and I'm focusing on pragmatics of dreams rather than semiotics. And if you don't mind, I'll let him walk around. Otherwise, it would be. Yeah. So I'm focusing on dreams because I find it quite an interesting thing. I didn't research dreams, I just researched art. And I found that to be quite a significant part of their religiosity. So this is a painting of one woman who's in her mid-50s, and she never painted before. And she came and she said, I had a dream. She came to this studio that I showed you where women come and learn. She came and she said, I had a dream that I was walking with lots of people around me, and it was a huge gate. I wanted to go towards it. And all of a sudden, people spread to two sides, and I had a pathway to walk towards that gate. So I did, and I reached the gate. I find the owner of the art studio that you've seen waiting inside the gate and pointing at me just to wait, like, with her hand gesturing, wait. And then looking at her left as if she's listening to someone. And then all of a sudden, she looked at me and then she gestured, come in, as if she got the permission from that someone to get in. So she got in and she said, the moment I stepped in that gate, I felt I was in heaven. And she described lots of details about how beautiful and huge it is. So she came to this, she narrated the dream to the owner, and the owner told her, as if the imams are telling her now, we would like you to serve us through art, because you've never painted before, and she's not particularly religious in that sense, so she doesn't go to much of religious events. So this was an invitation in a way. So she started by painting this, and I asked her, this is quite impressive for a first-time artist. How did you do that? She said, I don't know. My hand just did it by itself, kind of that expression. And of course, technically speaking, there were lots of other women helping her. And I found it quite interesting in many levels, because they don't have that sense of ownership that many people do when they produce kind of artwork. So if I help someone significantly in their artwork, I might want to be, noticed or remembered or, mentioned, but not in their cases. So it's just her name, as you can see in the painting, and no one else who helped her on this will ever be known. So that is the kind of interesting dynamics they have in religious arts, in a way, in Kuwait, in this particular situation, where all they care about, according to what they told me and what I've noticed, is that they want to send a message. So pragmatics in here, when we talk about dream accounts, is that the dream has nothing to do, like the parts of the dream didn't do anything with what you're seeing here. So it's no gate, nothing. But we can see symbols of what she saw. So the guy or the person who was given permission for her to enter was the 12th Imam Mahdi, and she kind of remembered him through the red flag, as you can see. So there are things that, as Lydia Digaro would say, art helps to transfer emotions. So a dream happens right in the brain, in the mind. It stays there until you materialize it through words. And in this sense, it's kind of materialized through the way she narrated it, and then art helped it to become a tangible, visible thing. So that is where I found art and dreams become super interesting and can help us to learn more about what matters more, because I think dreams are interesting because they happen in the back of our head, or what they call subconscious, right? So the people, what matters to them the most is what they dream about, or according to Freud, everything is kind of sexual symbols, right? When anything is suppressed, it comes out in the dreams. And in this case, of course, I will not go through his work here, but I found that also quite interesting, because he talks about psychoanalysis in a different way. And in here, having particular focus on symbols and what they mean cross-culturally is also interesting, because across Islam, it's different as well. And this is what I found missing about talking about Shia art or Shia dreams, is that the symbols in Islamic dreams is tagged as one thing. And when we talk about Islam as if Islam is one thing, and again, as anthropologists, we all know there's always a problem with the generalization. So in Islam, there's so many subsections and so many particular symbols mean different things. So if you go to a Sunni and tell them to explain this, you would understand why is there a horse or is there, a flag, if having these symbols in their dreams mean nothing, But for Shia, it's, without me describing anything to a Shia person, if I show him this or show her this, they would immediately understand what these are. So these are so significant, yet small, significant, important details. Another fact dream as well about a girl who wanted to participate in an art, but because she had a problem she couldn't, so there were only 3 days left before the exhibition, and this is a really huge painting, so it's like 2 meters by 2 meters or something, so it's really big. And she did that all in 3 days. And again, I asked her, how did you do that? Because it's significantly huge, but also very, very well done. And she said, Nada, again, it was my hand doing that, but I had a dream of the Prophet's daughter, Fatima, who came to me and as if she touched me, and she's like blessing me to be able to do this. And she said, usually in painting, what we do is we do several strokes before we get the right one. In this case, 1 stroke and I got everything right. So it's, again, very interesting how they relate to what they see is important. And then I found art is occupying quite a significant part of it. And it speaks to a lot of the newer generations of Shia Muslims who are not so much interested in attending sermons or, going to the typical religious settings. Yeah, so again, we're talking about dream accounts. So that's when dreams go from the head to being shared. That kind of dream account is, I think, what is interesting in understanding what goes on when people talk about it, how they share it, where they share it, what aspects they also hide. It's quite interesting as well. So from what I noticed is that dreams can also be used as a karama. Karama in this case, as I explained it there. So it seems as a spiritual gift. So as I showed you in the first example with the painting of the horse, she feels that she's been gifted. She's been invited to become an artist, and that's quite significant. And again, focusing on pragmatics versus semiotics is quite significant in this as well, because symbols alone will not be able to explain to us, but understanding all the context that goes around the dream is what will help us to understand a little bit more. And I'm not going to go through this. I think I've already spoken about it. This is a little too much. So there's so many roles that dreams play in Islam now, in general speaking. So they are seen as window to the unseen world. They are kind of an authoritative source where people feel, if I had a dream about the Prophet telling me something, as if he was literally there and he told me something. And you will see in the history of Islam, some leaders make decisions based on dreams, religious leaders, which is quite interesting. Predictions of future, reflecting specific things that happens in their life, and of course, a response to their prayers. Also, I found it interesting that there are, dreaming is not just something that happens, they have to work together. So there's a long list of, as you can see here, a long list of ethics involved in dreaming. Not all of it, of course, they don't practice all of that, but there's some elements in there, and sometimes they come up with their own ethical practices, just so that you have to, again, to purify yourself, you have to be prepared to be someone who can have a dream like that. So from the work that I've done so far, I've noticed that dreams work as transformational agents, and also as divine mediation and rewards in those particular cases. I don't think I'll have time for this art agency. I'm going to skip it because it's quite a lot, but I'm going to go to the end of it where I talk about, yes, Gel's theory of art, where he's technically have a very clear sequence of divine artists. So art goes from the initiator, which is in this case the divine or God or saints, and then object into the artist. But it can also go, which he didn't discuss this way as well, the artist, they can be the initiators, and then through the art to reach the divine. But also the art itself can be the initiator, not just the artist, through the artist to reach the initiator. So I'm trying to tackle the aspect of what is primary agency, and in my particular research, there is no particular primary agency. It's very fluid. It could start with any of these 3 actors and can go any direction, depending on when and how we talk about it. So if they are talking about the dream, then we are talking about the artist having the initiation. If it's about when they are actually dreaming, then it's a completely different aspect. So I'm trying to tackle this in a current paper that I'm working with. So if anyone has any ideas about what they're doing with agency, I'm going to be extremely happy to hear and take on comments. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nada, for everyone who has arrived a little bit later. We're not now taking questions for the discussion, but just in the second part. So if there's anything urgent clarification questions for Nada, please go for it. Oh, sorry. Sorry, you did not see me. I hope you heard me. If not, we are getting to our next speaker, who is Adam, who is joining us online. Adam, I guess you can share your screen yourself. And I will quickly introduce you. So Adam Bobeck is a PhD candidate at the University of Leipzig in Germany. And I guess you're also joining right now from Leipzig, right?
Yes, I am.
And his PhD is titled Object-Oriented Rituals, Ontology and Ritual Studies. So Adam, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay? Is it coming through? Okay. So first of all, thank you, Janine Medellin and Bernardo, for welcoming me onto the panel. It's really an honor for me to be here. So the title is Aesthetic Forms and Aesthetic Functions, a non-relational approach to ritual and art. And I guess I should start off by saying where I think I fit kind of on the panel, because in the description, it said that both theoretical contributions and empirical research were welcome. And initially, I thought I was doing something a little more empirical. And as the presentation sort of developed, it became more and more theoretical. And so I guess I fit here on the theoretical side. So that's where that goes. I have 5 slides, basically, where I'll be connecting ritual and art, and where I think they meet. I will then be making an argument for a non-relational approach, which then turns to Walter Benjamin's idea of the aura. And finally, a very common debate in the anthropology of ritual especially is kind of form, function, and content. There are these 3 sides to it. And I'll outline what my theoretical contribution is with my final slide, which I've titled Object-Oriented Ritual. So what got me thinking about this, it's appropriate that I'm right after Nada here, because what got me thinking about this is actually my own research in a Hosseiniya here in Leipzig. I myself am a Shia Muslim, and so I decided to kind of work with my own community. And the Hosseiniya here in Leipzig is very cut off from the surroundings. So I'll be arguing that a lot of anthropology of ritual and a lot of anthropology of art is based on the relational aspect between rituals and art. And what I noticed very quickly when I went to the Hosseiniya is how cut off it is from Leipzig, actually. When I go to the Hosseiniya, it's behind, like many mosques and Hosseiniyas here in Germany, it's behind a door, it's in a courtyard, it's hidden, there are no signs indicating where it is. And in fact, people outside of the community don't even know that there's a Hosseiniya there. So, for example, Muharram is coming up, I think it starts on Friday, and the rituals will take place every night in the Hosseiniya, and people outside of that courtyard really have no idea that these things are happening in the courtyard. So the connections between ritual and art may be obvious for some people, but the connections between the anthropology of ritual and the anthropology of art are especially interesting because they both are hyper-focused on aesthetics. So the anthropology of ritual is often talking about symbols, it's often comparing ritual to theater in the performative term and things like that. There's a lot of very interesting cross-fertilization, especially connected to Marilyn Strathern's work, which I'll be getting into. And finally, I think most importantly, and probably due to their cross-fertilization, they're both hyper-focused on relations. So the basis of the anthropology of ritual and the basis of the anthropology of art, I'm claiming, are both the focus is on relationality. And so really everyone from Emile Durkheim to Anat Singh has kind of focused on relationality when talking about ritual processes. And so just to give you kind of a taste of where this is in both the anthropology of ritual and the anthropology of art, in the anthropology of ritual, we have Catherine Bell, who wrote that ritual is really about the production and negotiation of power. And Edith Turner and her husband Victor Turner, who are both very famous in anthropology generally, but especially in the anthropology of ritual, both took kind of a doubly relational attitude towards ritual in arguing that ritual is always processual and always symbolic, and they sort of were concerned with the relations between symbols themselves. So there's the representational there, which is itself a relation, and then there's the relations between the different representations for the Turners. Alfred Gell, of course, in perhaps most famously, made use of Strathern's idea of the individual, and the New Melanesianists focus on relations in his study on art and agency. And of course, Marilyn Strathern, who, I don't want to critique these people. I have a different position than them, but I don't want it to sound like I'm critiquing them. I mean, Marilyn Strathern is easily one of my favorite anthropologists of all time. So I'm in no position to be critiquing any of them. I'm just taking a slightly different approach. Strathern, of course, is hyper-focused on relations. In fact, she just published a book last year called Relations. I think I have it back there. I think it's called Relations. And she has this sort of very classically empiricist influence here where relations precede the objects that are relating, right? Relations precede relata, which is actually very close to Karen Barad's agential realist ontology, where reading through contemporary physics, Karen Barad argues that relations precede relata as well. So what's the problem with relationism? I think there are two problems with relationism that have both been pointed out by object-oriented ontologists. The first problem with relationism is you really can't account for change, which means that, and Graham Harman, one of the most famous object-oriented ontologists, often goes back to Aristotle here. Aristotle talks about the difference between a blind person and a person who has their eyes closed. And with a perfectly relational ontology, there would be no difference between a blind person and a person with their eyes closed, right? So because they're relating to things in the same way, you couldn't account for the change that happens when the person with their eyes closed opens their eyes. And so this is sort of the problem with relationality as the center of your approach. The other problem is that it's very difficult or almost impossible to account for different levels of importance to relations. So some relations, I would argue, are more important than other relations. Moving your arm is different than having your arm cut off, right? They're both relating to you, and those actions are relating to you, but you need to be able to account, I think, for the difference in importance of the relation, which is exactly what object-oriented ontology, this very niche sort of budding philosophical movement, is really about. It's really about being able to account for change and emergence all at once. And so when it comes to ritual and when it comes to art, really what I think we need to do is we need to look at ritual in its own right, to use the term of the book by Don Handelman and Galina Lindquist. And I think we need to look at art in its own right. We need to be able to kind of cut off art from its surroundings in sort of this more traditional formalist way, but I think with a twist. It's formalism with a twist here. And so this brings me to the aura, right? If you don't know, Walter Benjamin had this concept of the aura in much of his work, but especially in the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, where he defines art objects. He asks, what's the difference between art objects and other objects? What makes an art object special, or what makes an object worthy of art? And his argument is that art objects have what he calls an aura. They have something to them that's very special. And so he defines it as a distance, no matter how far it really is. And you can think of famous paintings. Why do people go see famous paintings in a gallery when they've seen them a million times on the internet or in media representations or something like that? You can think of the Benin bronzes, right? Why are European museums so hesitant to give back Benin bronzes to the people from whom they stole them? Arguably, it's because they think there's this aura to the Benin bronzes themselves that that pictures or something else don't carry of the Benin bronzes, right? Benjamin also connects art and ritual in a very interesting way in that essay, where he says that the first art object had to be in service of a ritual. So getting back to my first slide, what are the connections between ritual and art? I mean, this has a lengthy tradition, not only in anthropology, but also outside of anthropology. And so I think the aura is really valuable here for emphasizing autonomy over relations, which is really what I'm arguing here, is that I think we need to be emphasizing autonomy over relations. I think Susan Sontag is really important as well, because she kind of expands Benjamin's idea of the aura also to mechanically reproduced objects like photographs. And I think that's really the kind of direction that I think we should be moving in. Another approach would be Graham Harman's weird formalism. And weird formalism is an interesting idea from, Graham Harman is an object-oriented ontologist, and weird formalism is the idea that art is actually is not the artwork itself, like a painting or something like that, but it's actually when the person and the painting come together, they form a new object, and that is the artwork. It's the human plus art hybrid object, which he calls weird formalism. I think there's some value to it. I think there's a lot of value, actually, but I think there's some problems with it that I don't think I have time to get into because I'm already reaching my time. So let me quickly move on to form, function, and content. Fritz Stahl and Stanley Tembia, of course, had this very classical debate in anthropology about the meanings of rituals. Fritz Stahl argued that rituals are meaningless. He actually has an essay called The Meaninglessness of Ritual. And Stanley Tembia took a more performative approach, took a more semiotic approach, not unlike Alfred Gell, using Peircean semiotics to really analyze the way the symbols and the symbolics within rituals functioned. And so their debate is really about the background and the foreground of rituals. It's really about the background, what are the structures of the ritual, and then what are the symbols, what are the things you can see about the ritual that you don't need to read hidden structure into, right? And so this debate is really about form and content. However, in ritual studies, in the anthropology of ritual, it often gets blurred with another distinction, which would be between form and function, which would be the non-relationality of the form versus the relationality of the function. If you say a ritual is always relating to things, you're kind of doing what the functionalists did, right? You're really talking about the function of the ritual rather than cutting the ritual off from the outside and just treating ritual in its own right. And I think we have the problem here because the word on the first side of these dichotomies is form. And so my proposal is that we use kind of updated terminology here, and we say furtive formalism when we're contrasting with content, which would make Fritz Stahl, for example, a furtive formalist. Furtive, of course, meaning stealthy, hidden, concealed, withdrawn, right? So it's about background and foreground. And then I think we need to talk about free formalism instead of function. We need to talk about autonomous formalism. We need to talk about the form being cut off from its surroundings. And so that's really my big contribution here is I think we need to split up formalism, and I think we need to treat free formalism as an important approach to both ritual and art as well. And before I end, I do want to say this is a non-relational approach, not the non-relational approach, right? And that's why the title, I'm saying it's a non-relational approach to ritual and art, because I think there are actually a lot of open roads here that a lot of people can take. And my proposal is, I think, just a very mild, small proposal among many other possible ways we could do this. I think of, for example, Aimé Césaire's Discourse on Colonialism, where he proposes sort of a poetics of non-relation, I would argue, a poetics of non-relation to really analyze the way that communities of people engage with one another. Also, Sylvia Wynter's Science of the Word as a way of thinking through human relations, not only to other humans, but also to themselves. So I think there are moves towards autonomy that we can take. I'm just proposing this very minor one, and I hope that was easy enough to follow, and I didn't get too muddled and lost in myself. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Adam.
Yep.
Okay, our next speaker is Carol Balthazar. Carol is a lecturer in public anthropology at the UCL, and she's working on research collaborations with creative practitioners in the UK, but has also done research on nationalism and material culture. And this last year, her book was published, which is called Ethics and Nationalist Populism at the British Sea Summit, Negotiating. So, what's yours?
Thank you. I'm gonna talk. Why? Okay, they don't let me open Google. Let's take. Okay, do you know how I put, like, is it good enough? Because I don't know how to put the entire screen. Where is it? And where's this one? Yeah, this one. Great, thank you.
Screen sharing.
Okay. It's this one. Yes. I think that's one, right? Okay. But they're not seeing me, are they?
They should see you.
Are you seeing me, guys, online? Okay.
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Okay. If I stand here, can you see me?
Yes.
Good, good. Okay, we got this. Hi there. Thank you, everyone online. Thank you, everyone who's here in person. I might be a bit confused with the two things, but let's do this. Okay, so my paper today is about this ongoing approximation between the arts and anthropology, and like this communication exchange, probably in anthropology since the 1980s, since the crisis of representation, and how we are thinking about our practice more and more as a creative practice.
And in the arts, I'm particularly interested in what, for example, Roger Santi calls the social turn in the arts. So how much many artists are moving from objects and exhibitions to focus on events and to create ephemeral communities. And within this scene, this artistic scene, I'm particularly interested in what Bohio has called relational aesthetics. So basically, the way my paper connects to this panel is I won't be discussing the aesthetics of an object, but the aesthetics of relationships. So in that sense, not only objects entail an aesthetic form, shape, but also social configurations can have a shape to it. That's more or less what I'm thinking here. Okay, but my argument here today is I think an emphasis on the social turn in the arts may be a bit obliviating. So my paper is kind of a caveat to this discussion. Although there might have been a change of artistic focus or outcome, I here want to highlight how potentially all creative practices can produce relational aesthetics, independent of the artist's individual ambition, not only creative practices, but also our practice as ethnographers. Therefore, this paper suggests that relational aesthetics should not be used to consider the outcomes of the social turn in the arts or the creative turn in anthropology, but is a highly relevant analytical instrument to consider the most different kinds of artistic and anthropological practices, including the ones that are not necessarily committed to generating new social forms. Not doing so may contribute to the obliteration of the relational and political impact that both artists and anthropologists have in our field sites, basically. The way that I'm going to do this today, I start by discussing Martin's Parr work, which is a photographer. I was trying to share some Google images of him. Won't be able to do it, but I will describe a little bit his work. And maybe later on in the next section, I can show some images. So I will describe an encounter that one of my research interlocutors had with him. And then I will compare this with my encounter with my research interlocutor as part of my ethnographic practice, and compare the two situations in relation to the idea of relational statics, social forms, and so on. Okay, so just to contextualize a little bit, I've been doing research in Margate, in Thanet, Southeast England, so close to nearly the French coast, so really Southeast England. If I move to the next slide, so like from London to Margate, it's up here. From London to Margate is around is less than 2 hours by train, and as you can see in the previous image, Margate is a seaside town. There's a lot that I could talk about Margate. I've been doing research there for over 10 years now and engaging with the most different kinds of situations. It's a tiny town that is going through quite a lot. So there is a lot going on in terms of nationalism in the area. So for example, just to give an idea, Nigel Farage, he ran for the parliament in the area. But at the same time, the town has been the focus of a strong regeneration process funded by the local government and central governments in the UK. And an important part of this regeneration process are the creative industries. So the first part of my work, for the first years, I worked with the local retired community on trying to understand the relationship between nationalism, material culture, temporality. And as Janine has mentioned, this became the book that was published last year. But more and more, I've been collaborating with local creatives. One of the things that I've been interested in is a lot about my work on nationalism, considers how there is an aesthetic, a feeling to it that I think is not really properly grasped by our texts, the texts that we write. So I'm very much interested in the kind of discussions, like, can we move beyond texts as anthropologists? Can we generate outputs that are not just texts? what kind of outputs would those be? Interested in those questions. In 2019, I spent 2 months as researcher in residence in a local studio called Resort Studio, and collaborated with different creative practitioners there. And part of the discussions that I will mention today took place during this encounter. I continue in contact with all the different interlocutors I had in the area. So both the retired community who I worked before, the creative practitioners. I just did a workshop there in May this year, where I was actually sharing part of the thoughts that I'm presenting here, getting their feedback. So it's an ongoing relationship and an exchange. Okay, talking a little bit about Martin Parr. I imagine most of you probably know him. He is a British photographer, was born in the 50s. His Wikipedia page says he's a documentary photographer that develops satirical and anthropological look at aspects of modern life, in particular documenting the social classes of England. His website, the official one, acknowledged that his photos are exaggerated or even grotesque. It's basically because it shows people eating very greasy food, for example, or on the other side, like kids playing on the beach and eating an ice cream and so on. Those are the kinds of motives. He has become very well known for portraying the different social classes of the UK, but not just in the UK, worldwide. And the reason why there are many ways that Martin Parr could become part of my work, but here today, I want to mention Mary, who was one of the local creatives that I met in the area. Mary is a fake name, just to protect a little bit her privacy, because the situation that I will describe wasn't a comfortable one for her, basically. She's English, had moved to Margate some decades before 2019 when we met. In the 2000s, Mary lived in an area of Margate that became a focus of a big heritage project that hoped to contribute to the regeneration of Margate. And part of this process was to refurbish some of the buildings, but mainly the exterior parts of the buildings in order to preserve, maintain those buildings. And Mary lived in one of the buildings that was the target of this project. As a resident of the area, Mary at the time did not realize that the project could have a negative impact to the residents, and she became a leading figure in the negotiations. So she was basically invited by the people leading the project. Oh, since you're a resident, you get on well with the neighborhood, could you mediate the relationship, like be our way to contact the other residents? And she agreed. It was then that Martin Parr got involved. According to Mary, the idea of the leaders of the project, not hers, was that Parr could take some photos of the residents, help and sell those photos, helping to raise money and awareness to the project. So they wanted to hire this well-known and world-known photographer to kind of gain attention to what was going on in the area. According to Martin, according to Mary, the idea of the leaders of the project, Mary was then responsible for mediating this relationship between Parr and the other residents of the local historic buildings. Because Margate had been the center of many economic problems among the residents of these buildings, there were many different people facing different levels of material or social deprivation. This is also an important element of Margate that I forgot to mention. Like in 2004, Margate was defined as a pocket of deprivation in England, and that's the reason why this whole regeneration project is ongoing, trying to change the economic situation of the area. And Mary was explaining to me, they were all very desperate and disparate, the residents, not coming together, everyone very different from one another, coming from very different backgrounds. Some were made to live there, they were forced to live there by the council. Others, which meant that they weren't very happy, according to them. Some were wearing electronic ankles. So there was a lot of drug dealing in the area. So it was a tricky scene, as Mary described it to me. Although there were many levels of difficulty, here I will not focus so much in the social context of deprivation, but specifically on Martin Parr's visit to this situation as Mary describes it to me, and its relational and political implications, basically. According to Mary, Parr was very intrusive. She explained that while she waited for him, there was a mix of intimidation, as he was this very well-known figure, and some positive anxiety. After all, being photographed by a well-known photographer could also be seen as an opportunity. So she was excited about it. It was this positive expectation that encouraged Mary to open the doors of her home to the photographer, and also encourage other local residents to do the same. But she tells me it felt open, quotes, it felt new and super exciting. So we were knocking on doors and getting people to have their photos taken. We got around 40 to 50 people. They were thinking they were going to get nice photos done, basically. After finally encountering Parr, Mary's views changed. He was very set on what he wanted, she tells me. According to her, the photographer entered her house and decided to photograph many different rooms, including the bedrooms, while not allowing the residents to change anything. The residents didn't know what they were going to do. So he was going to do, so she didn't know what to expect. He also requested people to be portrayed in a particular position. They had to stand up right in the middle of the room, next to each other. So Mary stand up next to her partner, looking right in front of the camera, arms down, body straight, so they couldn't move. I don't show the photos because she actually hates the photos. So the whole thing is very disturbing for her, so I won't reproduce something that's not comfortable for her. The three members of Mary's house were photographed in the same position in different rooms of the house that they didn't choose, Parr chose. And according to Mary, particularly traumatizing, Mary tells me, was her daughter's experience. In her teens, an age when most people are already very vulnerable to public commentary, she was photographed in the position described and in front of her very untidy room, as Mary tells me. Although she tried to tidy up before the photo was taken, Parr did not allow it. The residents probably ripped up the photos once they got it, she told me. And she says she cannot not even look at the photos, and that's why I'm also not showing it. So here I want to draw attention to the fact that although Parr was not necessarily committed to a social turn in the arts, he did not only generate an art object, the photograph. The very event of taking a photo also had a relational aesthetics to it, and a very powerful one. In asking his interlocutors to position themselves in a very particular way, Parr was physically subjugating people, and in doing it in front of a camera. Interlocutors were not allowed to move around their own home and choose how to display their own possessions. Beyond the impact of the photograph would have later in terms of representation, the very event of the practice of the photo being taken, the visit, forged bodies in a very particular way, right? There's a form to it. So that's what I'm trying to, this whole discussion, there is a lot of discussion about Marty Parr's work in terms of the politics of representation. But I think this discussion don't go as far as you think about the very shape of this event, how this event is shaping bodies, is making people behave and position themselves in relation to an artist. And I say artist because that's how we call, in a way and subjugate themselves physically in that situation. So I'm trying to draw attention to that event. I know I don't have many more moments, so I'll just broadly draw a bit the conclusions. In that sense, I'm trying to draw attention to the fact that we can't just talk about relational aesthetics in terms of artists who intend to develop that. How much every practice generates a sort of relational impact in the process of it. And obviously this takes me to consider my fieldwork experience. So I was talking to my other interlocutors, okay, so what does it say about me then and the kind of situation I'm creating here doing this research? Was interesting because I was talking to another local creative artist, Teresa this time. And I was a bit frustrated because I was expecting to generate some sort of creative object or creative performance out of our collaboration together. And then it was Teresa who said, but listen, the very questions you ask, the kind of situations you generate by being here and asking those questions and putting people together in the studio to discuss the topics that you're raising, you already generate a very specific setting. Your questions, and she told me, help me to think about my work a bit more. I don't try to describe my work in terms of words all the time, but because you trigger the questions, it makes me reflect on my work, and not only reflect on my work, but also do it with the other members, and also consider the social context where we are in, and so on. My point being, well, I was expecting to, my point being, and I will try to summarize two last paragraphs. Yeah, two last paragraphs. Therefore, influenced by the approximation between arts and anthropology, I had arrived in Margate expecting to generate a different kind of output for my research practice. But simply, I expected to produce a creative object instead of an academic text paper. I also consider that the outcome of my collaboration with artists in Margate could be, for example, an artistic performance. Why not? But what the local creatives, such as Teresa, and others, I'm just citing one here for the sake of time, but what she was helping me to understand was the level that my research practice in itself was an outcome for her. According to Teresa, instead of documenting a previously existing knowledge, my presence was contributing to the generation of a new kind of knowledge. And in the same time, generating a group of people that was exchanging this knowledge through my mediation. So how much this was the kind of ephemeral community that Bohir was talking about. So similar to the way that Martin Parr's practice can be considered from the perspective of relational aesthetics, so my own practice, so my own research practice can be considered to develop. In that sense, the term relational aesthetics should probably be used not only to consider the works of art influenced by the social turn in the arts, but all artworks, and also our research practice can be considered from this perspective. So equally, anthropological practice can also be seen from this angle. In doing so, we are taking to consider the creativity that exists in the most different stages of our practice, including during fieldwork, how fieldwork itself is profoundly creative and an output. As a consequence, an intensified approximation between art and anthropology does not necessarily require the fabrication of new outputs, but the investigation of aspects of our practice that have remained a bit hidden in the backstage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken. So we have our next speaker, Caroline Lillund. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. You have to, to correct me. So Caroline is trained as an anthropologist and specialized in contemporary Indian art and material culture. Last April, so congratulations on this, she defended her PhD thesis, which is entitled Distinctly Indian on the Value of Difference and Contemporary Art, and she defended it at the University of Copenhagen. So Caroline, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, and first, thank you, Bernardo and Jonathan Madeleine, for organizing this panel. I think the question that you posed in the call for papers about the effective and transformative potentials of aesthetic forms in transnational flows and local settings is a very important one. As you point out, art in its various forms is permeated by the very same structures of political and economic power, which it is regularly engaged to challenge and transform. While art has agency, its workings are complex and cannot be taken to simply reflect the intention of its producer. So while I'm not mentioning Alfred Gell in this presentation, obviously Alfred Gell's proposition of art having agency forms the profound question of this paper. So during the past 2 decades, the most prestigious European exhibitions of contemporary art have turned increasingly global and partisan in form, culminating so far in Documenta 15 and the 12th Berlin Biennale that are currently showing in Kassel and Berlin, respectively. In both exhibitions, decolonization, global capitalism, and cultural diversity constitute the overarching curatorial themes. For most of the Indian artists, however, it's not the relationship between North and South or black and white that is the motive of the works. It is the Indian caste system. Using the media of performance, installation, photography, and sculpture, the artists portray the ethos, hardship, and political struggle of the people at the bottom of the Indian caste hierarchy, those who are popularly known as Dalits or broken people. The artists are part of a new generation who belong to the lowest castes in the Indian caste hierarchy and actively use their identity and social background as motives and fuel for their artistic practices. Until recently, these groups were largely invisible in Indian art, but the increased focus on difference and distinctiveness in and beyond the art world means that artists with Dalit and lower caste backgrounds are now gaining recognition and international exposure, even in some of the most prestigious art institutions like European Documenta, Art Basel, and the Venice Biennale. My presentation deals with the agency of art on and by Dalits when it is circulated and exhibited internationally, and also with identity as an aesthetic form that is attributed with ambiguous value in the global contemporary art world. It is my tentative proposition that identity itself has become an aesthetic form in contemporary art with an agency of its own. In the fast globalizing contemporary art world, difference of culture and identity constitute a central moral value. Today, difference and distinctiveness are celebrated throughout the art world, as is the idea of the nomadic artist, whose work has equal relevance no matter where it is produced or exhibited. As an aesthetic form, identity has been universalized, so to speak. Difference also constitute a significant economic value, both for the artists whose works get exhibited in and validated by prestigious Western art institutions, and for art dealers and investors who profit from the introduction of a brand new category of art products in the global market. It is with that in mind that I interrogate the agency of the novel aesthetic form that is by now termed as Dalit art by some scholars and critics. It is my contention that the transnational circulation of Dalit art offers a huge potential for the recognition of individual artists and for breaking down caste barriers in the Indian art world. And that is much needed. But outside the realm of the Indian contemporary art world, I find that the political agency of Dalit art as a distinct aesthetic form is limited. My presentation is based on data from the exhibitions of Indian artists in Documenta 15 and the 12th Berlin Biennale this summer, in addition to my earlier ethnographic fieldwork among artists and art professionals in India, mainly Mumbai, and in the UK between 2016 and 2018. My thoughts on the subject of art, value, and agency are still very preliminary. What I will offer is a series of observations and reflections on the intersection of value and agency in the exhibitions of select Indian artists who are now showing their works in Kassel and Berlin. Since the 1970s, Dalit literature and theater have provided a creative space and outlet for the expression of the grievances of the people who were previously known as untouchables. But until recently, fine art has remained the domain of elite aesthetics in India. Instead, a popular visual culture has evolved around the iconic figure of the famous independence era politician B.R. Ambedkar and the image of Buddha, with posters, calendars, and statues as its preferred media. This distinct aesthetic form of mass-produced artifacts is created by anonymous artists for a domestic audience and function as a powerful vehicle of cultural identification and political mobilization of Dalits in India. It is more difficult to establish the agency of the Dalit art that is now on display in the Berlin Biennale and Documenta. Contrary to the popular Dalit imagery, which is produced exclusively for Indian Dalits, contemporary Dalit art is aimed at a much wider circulation, socially and geographically. And that is reflected in its overall form and choice of media. Apart from the incorporation of distinct objects and materials that are associated with the life and identity of Dalits and lower caste, such as coal, dust, and scrap, and the vibrant blue color signifying anti-caste struggle, it largely conforms to a standardized repertoire of styles and genres that characterizes most contemporary conceptual art, with the use of installation, video and photography, mixed media, performance, and participatory interventions as its preferred media. The exhibition by artist Virendra Yadav that is now showing in Berlin is a case in point. The three artworks combine mixed media, photography and installation, and all relate to the discrimination and exploitation of migrant brick kiln workers in North India, who are mostly Dalits. For audiences who are not knowledgeable about Indian Dalits and anti-caste struggle, however, the agony may not be immediately felt in the bright white cube gallery among works on French politics and Twitter activity and the diversity of North Americans. Characteristically, exhibition visitors often spend more time reading the accompanying explanatory texts than looking at the actual artworks. In other words, the meaning of the works largely hinges on that textual contextualization. This observation does, of course, not preclude the possibility of a deeper, immediate aesthetic agency. I'll return to that point later. In the large exhibition by artist Amol Patil in Documenta 15, an old-fashioned cassette player fills the dark basement with the sound of sharp rhythmic drum beats and energetic, almost shout-like singing. It is the sound of Dalit performers using the age-old Marathi form of poda singing to lament and protest the exploitation. The translated texts can be read from laminated sheets hung on the low-lit walls among bronzes and paintings of detached or oddly conjoined body parts. The exhibition creates an uncanny yet poetic environment, but its overall connection to the performative traditions of Mumbai's working-class neighborhoods is again only established by the accompanying texts. Aesthetically, the works do probably not even come across as Indian to most visitors, but certainly as contemporary conceptual art. Here, it's important to note that the new generation of Dalit and lower caste artists do not agree on any common artistic aim or program. While some artists have an explicit political agenda, others are more interested in the aesthetic potentials of their practices. Nonetheless, transnational circulation is important to all of them. Most Dalit artists find it difficult to get their works exhibited and to obtain gallery representation in India, where the art world of gallerists, curators, and critics is overwhelmingly dominated by upper caste elites. Indeed, it is a widespread assumption among Dalit artists that they are overlooked and bypassed by curators and gallerists because of their caste. The exhibition of artworks outside India, in Europe, East Asia, Australia, and the US, is therefore considered paramount to the achievement of artistic success. This is also the case for most non-Dalit artists, by the way, since a breakthrough in India usually necessitates validation from international art institutions. Yet, there are attempts in India to create an an explicitly political movement of contemporary Dalit artists and their allies, which has a more distinct aesthetic form and a stronger popular appeal. Among Indian audiences, this art does not need textual contextualization to assume political agency. This shows us that the agency of art requires a common frame of reference. And it is precisely for this reason that I argue that Dalit art as an aesthetic form has only limited political agency in transnational art circuits. The meaning created around it is mostly discursive. The incorporation of Dalit iconography into the exhibition of the Delhi-based artist collective Party Office in Documenta 15 underscores my point. Here, the iconic bust of B.R. Ambedkar is shown along with that of the equally famous Tamil anti-caste politician Periyar, flooded in cobalt blue light. The rest of the exhibition space is flooded in red light and furnished with a couch behind curtains, a swing with a black whip, and a bottle of lubricant on its top, and in the middle of the room, a large DJ desk. The resemblance of a sadomasochist sex club is probably obvious to most visitors. The exhibition, Queer Time, Kinship and Architecture, is, according to the large boards at the entrance, a party space created by and for trans, BIPOC, and neurodivergent people. The installation of Dalit imagery into a sexually charged party space may not be immediately intelligible to all visitors. But for those who recognize Dalit as a marginalized identity, it likens it to the supposedly equally marginalized global identities of ethnic, racialized, queer, and transgender minorities, thus catapulting Dalit from a local to a universal aesthetic form. Put differently, Party Office exhibition works to globalize Dalit identity as an aesthetic form, even without textual contextualization. Though the exhibition hardly qualifies as Dalit art, I think that it aptly illustrates my argument, namely, that the main political agency of Dalit art in exhibitions like Documenta and the Berlin Biennale is to manifest and popularize the identity of Dalit as an aesthetic form. International critics have, however, loudly praised the works by Virendra Yadav, Amol Patil, and Prabhakar Campbell, shown in Berlin and Kassel, for their imaginative propensities and alluring tactile aesthetics. Though the political agency of the works may be limited, but best ambiguous, it certainly has aesthetic agency in the encounter with non-Indian audiences. Maybe we could call it as an aura. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Caroline. So we are getting to our last speaker, to Bernardo. I have to search for his short bio in my notes. Okay, Bernardo Machado holds a PhD in social anthropology from the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil, and he has been a student research collaborator at Princeton University in 2015 and 16. And since this year, he's a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Anthropology at the University of Campinas, and his research interests are transnational theater practices, education, gender, sexuality, and arts. So Bernardo, I guess you can also share the slides from your side, right? Thank you. The floor is yours.
Hello, thank you everyone. That's We are really happy that you are all here. Also, this is kind of crazy because I'm also a presenter, but as organizer and discussant, I'm really happy that we are here and discussing all this amazing papers and presentations. But let's get to the chase, and I will read my presentation. Otherwise, I'll get lost. So, theater is my presentation name is Performing Truth. Brazilian actors' strategies in reality show in a reality show based in New York. Theater is generally taken to be a local phenomenon, limited to be a specific region, yet shows, artists, and scripts have transited intensively around the globe ever since at least the 17th century. In this paper, I take some notes from a Brazilian reality TV show named Dançando na Broadway. Broadcast by a Brazilian channel in 2012, it exhibited 6 young Brazilian actors and actresses living in New York, competing to find out who would be the most prepared artist to join Broadway's stage. The research has a double objective: identify the social references mobilized to produce what could be true and false on the scene, and analyze which bodies were able to materialize the truth of a song or character. This text is part of this presentation, is part of a recent research effort that intends to discuss the uses of and meanings of the truth. The framework investigates the social classification systems of the stage and backstage in the process of making something true. I examine the conditions and constraints under which it's possible to perform and gain the status of a stage reality. The research does not assume truth under the traditional philosophical paradigm, a pre-existing principle, nor does it claim to produce a theory of truth, capable of seeing reality as it truly is. The approach understands truth as an emic category, fully social, intrinsically constituted in a relation experience. A category that guides practices, emotions, and for this reason is constituted in a moral category, capable of qualifying and disqualifying subjects and discourses precisely by establishing superiority to a given procedure or interpreter, describing it as a more reliable. That is, a moral economy that produces differences and guides people's behaviors. This theme, therefore, gains special relevance in a reality show whose subject is precisely actors. The truth games, central to various theatrical aesthetics, are also constitutive of the reality show's formula: competitions in which the reality of participants is under the scrutiny of an audience. Within this limit of this presentation, I will briefly comment on some aspects of this topic, precisely because this research is still in its early stages. So, some notes about reality shows. The Brazilian public met reality shows formally in the early 2000s. MTV Brazil produces what became known as the first reality show in the country. The name was 20-somethings. In the show, young people between 20 and 25 years old from different social classes shared a single apartment. The program followed the routine of the participants and the different behaviors. Subsequently, the leading TV network, Rede Globo, started to broadcast No Limite, a version of the Swedish program Expedition Robinson, in which participants went through extreme endurance tests. In the following year, the network SBT showed Casa dos Artistas, or House of Artists, featuring a group of celebrities who were confined in a residence and lived together. The country was impacted in 2002 with the premiere of Big Brother Brazil. Created in 2000 by the Dutch company Endemol, The copyrights were sold to more than 25 countries, a kind of audiovisual format in which national communication companies pay fees for the rights of adaptation and exhibition. From then on, the model had become more diversified. According to the classification made by researcher Ilana Feldman, it is possible to spot reality shows of several formats. For example, there are those known as voluntary confinement, such as Big Brother, whose focus lies on the monitored cohabitation, stimulating conflicts, and the exposure of private conducts. Another format is the interventionist reality shows, that is, the one that offers opportunity for participants to change their body, their house, their behavior, usually within a self-helping tone. There's also formats that prioritize atypical situations, such as playing the role of a mother in another family, such as Family Swap, or surviving in a 19th farm in the conditions of the past, like the 19th house, to name just a few. Finally, there are the professionalizing realities, whose goal is to select professionals in a particular field, as is in the case with MasterChef, Idols, or The Apprentice. Is in this last category that we can place Dançando na Broadway, this reality show. So, Dançando na Broadway was designed and directed by 3 Brazilians living in New York at the time, Rafael Alvarez, Tatiana Issa, and Guto Barra. In 2004, Rafael and Tatiana started a company called Tria Productions, and the project is to involve the cinematographic art. They designed, for example, a documentary called Zicocrates in 2009, and another TV show named Mundo em Movimento, broadcast by a Brazilian TV show channel named Multishow. Guto Barra and Tatiana were partners and producing partners, which specialize in the creation, development, and production of original content for television and cinema, with operations in Brazil and United States. The production companies were responsible for creating content for TV channels such as Multishow, GNT, MTV, among others. Headquartered in the United States, the company have a website in English that renamed Dancing on Broadway, or Dançando na Broadway, as Broadway Dreams. It's interesting because for the Brazilian public, the title evokes Broadway as a place, a space where dance can be performed. Artists would dance on Broadway. There is even a restriction regarding what it meant by a musical theater. Only dance is mentioned. Interpretation and singing are excluded from the appointment. In the English title, Broadway does not appear as to be a territory. It became a qualification of a dream. They are dreams whose content surrounds Broadway. The notion seems to transcend the definition of a mere physical location, a district in New York, and evokes glamour, global success, and other qualities. In addition, each title was addressed to a different audience. For the Brazilians, the geographic displacement was valued. Existing in the country to perform an artistic activity would be an achievement. In the case of the American public, it was interesting to point out how dreams can be contained or contaminated by Broadway imaginary. Despite the name, the discussion about dream was present in the program. For example, at the opening, presenter Didi Wagner, which is this young lady in the middle of the photo, announces the theme of the reality show. She says, 6 young Brazilian artists live in New York, dreaming in working on a Broadway musical, end of quote. Moved by expectations of immersion in the American entertainment market, they migrated in the early 2010 to try a career abroad. As a first step, they enrolled in dance workshops and acting classes. However, as time passed, they started looking for work in the competitive entertainment American market. Every episode, they learned a song and a choreography of a musical and performed for a jury of professionals from American musical theater. At the end of each one, specialists would choose a winner. Whoever had the highest number of victories became the season champion. Only 6 participants took part in the reality show. So this is, for example, Alice, 26 years, originally from Minas Gerais. Then Danilo was 24, Felipe 26, Gabriel 24, Livia 23, and Rebecca 22. Throughout 12 episodes, the cast performed numbers from shows such as Chicago, Hair, In the Heights, Mamma Mia, Rent, West Side Story, Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, Wicked, Chorus Line, Jesus Christ Superstar, and Cabaret. The chapters are similar in structure. In the first part, the team of professionals teaches the young artists a choreography and a song from the show in question. In the second part, we get to know more about these participants, where they work, how they arrived in New York, what dreams and expectations they have, and the difficulties they face. In a third moment, we see the 6-number individuals' presentation to the jury, and then we get to know who stood out and won the day's competition. In the very first episode, while learning a choreography by the prestigious Bob Fosse for the musical Chicago, Livia and Felipe point out the difficulties within the movements. After receiving a note from the teacher during class, there is an edit cut, and you can see a solo take from Livia, which is the young lady in the right, in which she explains herself. Quote, "My greatest strength is definitely singing, but we play on. And she opens a big smile and shakes her hair, and we smile. End of quote. She's addressing that she don't know how to dance as well as she knows how to sing. Following this, we have another scene, this time with Felipe, and he says, quote, "I'm not a dancer. My first background is an actor. I have always studied a little bit of dance, but it's really hard. I have been studying since February when I moved here." End of quote. Then the presenter, Didi Wagner, looks at the camera and says, "I have never imagined that would be so difficult." End of quote. A key element of the reality show formula is converting the personal dimensions of life, its most muted and real aspects, into fertile and profitable ground to be presented to the public. After the choreography and singing rehearsals for Chicago, we watch Felipe running through Brooklyn Park and in voiceover, he explains, this is Felipe. Quote, "I decided to be an actor when I was 8 years old. At 8 years old, I told my mother, I'm going to be an actor. So I auditioned for a musical school, and in the picture we see him entering the prestigious EMDA institution, the EMDA, American Musical and Dramatic Academy. I passed the exam, got a scholarship, which was actually my housing, and we have classes from 8 in the morning to 8 at night, studying musicals, living musicals. It's 24 hours a day thinking about the musicals. It's the best thing I could have done in my life. To guarantee truth content, everything must be visible, must be made visible. To achieve this, it's fundamental to create a sharing space of one's intimacy, a kind of biographical testimony that offers access to the person. In a reality show, it's necessary that everything becomes visible so that one can manage, predict, program, monitor, and stimulate. Feldman highlights how in reality shows there is no image snatching like a paparazzi. There's no observation without consent. There's no alienation on the part of the watcher, even though they naturalize and even eventually forget the vigilant gazes. Like Livy's stories, sitting in a coffee shop, she comments. So this is Livia. What I heard the most is that I need to lose weight. That is the hardest thing in the world for me. I used to be skinny. And in the voiceover, we see a take of the actress in a rehearsal room with a punching bag hanging on her shoulder. I had a thyroid problem and got really fat and then really thin. And in the other take, we see Livia in a rehearsal room in front of a mirror rehearsing a choreography like you can see in the picture. But there's still a lot to do to get there. I was maybe one day I will lose weight like this. Maybe not. Maybe this is the body I will have for the rest of my life. And I'm not giving up my career because of this, she says. So, end of quote. Telling the difficulties, the problems on the trajectory of part of the dynamics of a reality show. Beyond a possible voyeurism, as highlighted by Fedman, it is a controlled and directed exposure of the self. In a way, a kind of a stage impact that implies a productive power relationship, staging oneself and interpreting one's type in reaction in relation to the cameras. About this, Danilo tells us. So this is Danilo. Quote, when I was 6 years old, I had a traumatic brain injury. I was in a coma and wake up with everybody just desperate with me. My brain was fully functioning, but my muscles didn't obey me. I couldn't move. The doctors told me that I would never be able to have a physical career, which demanded intense physical activity. And that's exactly why I started dancing, to show that I could do it. And I don't know if I would be an artist that I'm today if I hadn't gone through this. End of quote. The participants of a reality show must be observed, like actors, from a certain angle. Sometimes the childhood dream, sometimes the weight loss demands, sometimes the overcoming of a physical difficulties. This framework creates a pact with the viewer in the act of spying, watching, or peeping. After all, their personality is at stake, but also, in the case of dancing abroad, the technique and action. In this sense, the truth games is in deep refraction. We can believe that what actors say, but distrust their interpretation, or even we can believe in their role plays and consider their personal trajectories to be forced. Those who expose themselves little gain little space for denying their participation for their participation on the program designs. At the end of that episode in the Sundance on Broadway, the 6 actors sang, danced, and performed songs and choreographed from the musical Chicago. While Philippe sang All I Care About You, Livia sang When You Were Good to Mama, and Danilo's dared to perform Mr. Cellophane. In the episode, we see snippets of their performances, and then the camera swinging to present the jury's comments and the cast's nervousness in a dressing room while waiting for the results. Although Livia came out of her performance confident, Danilo took the prize. According to the judges, he connected with the character material and the public and the music, moving the jury. He said, "You believed in your choices. It was great," when jury said that. The victor was not therefore restricted to winning the prize, but was in fact affected throughout the individual's entry. I'm just finishing, entry into a regime of visibility of his own, in which is necessary first to demonstrate the difficulties overcome and connected with characters to present themselves. This is a commitment to reality, a discourse of truth that still deserves further scrutiny to identify its systems and nuances. Thank you very much, and sorry for taking so long.
Thank you very much, Bernardo. And thank you everybody. For some magical reason, our time has shrunk. And if I see it correctly, we only have like 7 minutes left for discussion. Anyway, I would like to open the floor for discussion and to get your inputs, of course, also from the online side. If you would like to say something on this side, please just raise your hand. And the same here, and we would like people to come up to speak here into the camera so that the online participants can also see.
Very short. Yeah. First of all, hello everybody. Good to see you guys. Ciao Francesca, hi Adam. Thanks for these papers. I'll make it very short. I just wanted to say, especially to the first paper, that was very interesting how you decided to play with gel, and I really think that his incredibly simplistic idea of, you know, the sort of way in which intentionality and especially agency is bestowed on objects and then on recipients is a precise counterpart to what Carol tried to do with the relational aesthetics, sort of mobilization beyond Bourdieu. And I think that there was a really beautiful connection between these two papers, because we have to rethink how relationality and agency is being bestowed. I mean, the whole idea that that some creator bestows an object or a materiality with a sort of an entrapping sort of agency is entirely, I think, archaic. And so I think that especially conceptual and relational art really gives a different, you know, allows us to reread Gell. And of course, we can't really blame Gell, because maybe he was just not, you know, considering conceptual and relational art. That was one thing I wanted to say. And then just Bernardo, on your paper, I mean, thanks so much for raising these issues. I just think that the whole problem of truth in theater is quite honestly one of the most under discussed themes, especially post-ontological turn. I mean, is there any field that since Plato has been so much troubled by the question of whether what it does is reality or not? You know, and it's so perverse that even after Brecht already kind of like revolutionized theater by thinking about this, we still don't really have a discussion about ontology, theater, and truth. You know, I mean, of course, you're making reference to Martin Holbradt's work in some ways, but I think, again, that's in the field of religion. And I think the very idea of a network like the Antart network was precisely to try and say, it is through the arts that we can really rethink these categories in a very interesting and different way. And I think a genealogy of truth production, you know, in theatrical creativity is really much needed. So I think you can continue along those lines. Anyway, comment.
Would you like to react on that, someone?
Like I said, in the interest of time, maybe it was
If not, thank you
I
very
would
much.
like to,
Yeah, please.
yeah, sorry, no, I would like just to thank Maxime for the comment. And I think we have such a short time. Maybe tomorrow we can like develop more this point. But I would like to thank everyone, Nada, Adam, Caroline, Ana Carolina, and Caroline, for the amazing work that you presented today for us. I have a few questions for each one of you, but I won't take much the time, because I know we have like scheduled, but I'm pretty confident that we can see each other tomorrow and discuss it with more time.
Since we have 2 minutes, can I just say something in relation
Yes,
to
of
what
course.
Jonas just said?
Okay.
No, just like kind of to respond a little bit, because I don't know if you're going to be here tomorrow. But yeah, one part of the paper that I didn't have the time to develop is exactly how much. Okay, so if I'm saying that actually my work is about, my research work is a kind of artistic practice, then I relate it a little bit to artistic performance. How much what we do as an ethnographer is artistic performance, and then that gets to the ethical question, which is, if I'm calling it performance, am I saying it's fake because it is theater? So then we are forced to engage. No, theater is not fake. It's a different kind of reality. What kind of reality is that? What kind of reality are we generating when we set up a specific ethnographic context or contribute to the setup of a specific situation of encounter with our research interlocutors? And then I think opens up also all sorts of complex discussions about what truth is, what reality is, what data is, how we are creating those things. And they are not fake or not fake, they are more complex than that. And actually, I actually refer to Holbradt's paper that he did about theater, not just religion, considering how theater is about hyper-reality, excess of reality, instead of just some sort of fiction take on it. Anyway, we can continue in the next session. I just wanted to react.
Then thank you very much. I guess we have 1 minute left, but I think we will continue tomorrow afternoon. So you're all very welcome to come to the second session of this panel tomorrow. And I thank everyone, both online and offline here, for your participation and also for our technical support. Thank you so much. And see you tomorrow. Yeah, the other one is at 2:45.
So there is a second.
No, sorry, tomorrow afternoon, not today.
Okay.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to say thank you all, but it's very supportive and for your ladies. So thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I know